Yes.
Yeah. Good morning, good day, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many being able to join this consultation on the EITI open data, where I was invited to on quite short notice. So I'm glad that so many could join us today. I'm just going to present a few ground rules, and then I'll hand it over to Technical Director Sam Bartlett, who will give a short introduction. First of all participants, great if you can mute your line webinar. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat window, which you should see on the web screen. And with I'm giving it over to Sam to give an introduction to what this is all about.
And hello, everyone. We have lots of friends joining today and some new names. It's not my intention today to do an hour-long lecture about open data. We're running a consultation process, and what I wanted to do today was dig different on the just relating to open data. People here who are perhaps new to the EITI, so I think it's to spend just a few minutes explaining the background for our work and what this consultation is about. Doing the EITI now for the best part of, for over a decade. We're soon a teenager. The EITI started out with just a handful of countries, now 48 countries that implement the EITI. And we start with those countries. It's in countries that are in the EITI, doing the hard work of collecting all this information at the national level. The International Secretariat, part of our work is helping implementing countries do that work well. There's, of course, a standard that's established at the international level, the EITI standard, and work underway at the moment looking at the strengths and weaknesses of that. And there's been some online. But what are we doing when we talk about open data? Well, when we first started work, the EITI was relatively simple. The core idea was companies would disclose the tax payments that they make and would disclose the revenues that they receive. Figures would be reconciled and would produce an EITI report. That's what lots of countries have done now. Through adoption of the EITI standard, we've also, there are requirements that relate to a whole range of other issues relating to licensing, production figures, the way revenues are distributed, lots of information about the governance of the extractive industry. So EITI reports are getting broader, more comprehensive, and a lot more detail. Company information, by agency revenue data, and more countries are moving towards project level reporting as well. So that the EITI reports are being bigger and more complicated. The majority of countries today, those reports are produced as large PDF files. A huge barrier to that is being utilized by stakeholders in the country and internationally to understand what's happening. So look at some of the reports that have come out this year. In the majority of cases, the main product is a very large and very technical EITI report written by an independent administrator. And dig into looking at a particular commodity or a particular company or a particular government agency or the region, a particular region in the country. To find all the information in the PDF report is difficult. That's what this consultation about open data is all about. So we're going to hear today from some people that are working at a level to get that information from big reports and get that out there so that stakeholders can use it. And talk about the work doing at the international level, clearly what EITI's policy should be on open data, and what kind of support we can provide in terms of developing standards. So standards that countries can draw on so they can organise and disseminate their information in a consistent way. What we're hoping that we'll achieve today is two things. One is to inspire you to look a bit differently at challenges that are facing the EITI. You have to write high-quality reports, meet the EITI requirements. But if we hard work and won't get this data into the hands of people that want it, then the EITI is going to realise its potential. So the challenge of open data as being really one of the sort of keys on the horizon for the EITI community in the next sort of 3 to 5 years. The challenge you to do is formally with consultation on open data. Find it on our website. I've got a list of questions there that we'd like stakeholders to comment on. You don't have to feel constrained by those questions. You need to write a long, detailed submission. It can be as simple as sending Anders and myself a short email saying these are issues that we think are most important. We'd like to get as many different views on these challenges as possible. Help us develop a position paper that we can take to the board and only to the next conference in next year in Lima. Sure, we'll see at the conference, one of the best parts of the global conference is the National Expo, where we all implementing countries coming together and profiling what they do. Yeah, people with big PDF reports, they see people with visualizations of the data that you're using and also presenting the EITI data so make use of it when they like. Short introduction, Anders, perhaps we could some of our other present today to give their perspective on the open data challenge.
So we have two distinguished discussants who give a short comment, and then we're opening the floor to all of you participants. And if you have a question, I urge you to write it down in the chat window now, and I can call upon you as soon as we go into the Q&A session. I'd like to introduce Andrew Schluffel, who works in the Energy and Extractives group at the World Bank. Now, he's been grappling with these data issues in many EITI countries, and also on the global, he's involved with a number of interesting projects that I'm sure he's talked to us about. So, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Anders and Sam, and good morning or good evening, everyone. And as Anders, I'm the technical lead for the EITI under the new EPS Global Trust Fund that the World Bank is in the process of establishing. One of the things that we have been working on with the International Secretariat is this issue of open data and data standardization. And one of the things that if you go through the standard and if you look at the website that the EITI maintains, there's a lot of guidance on a lot to report, but there's still not a huge amount of guidance on how to report some of these requirements that are in the standard. So as a result, and sort of along the lines of what Sam said, our country has a very different way of presenting the various information disclosures that are required in the standard. And what's important for countries to have, ownership of their reports, do it in a way that makes sense. The doubt in some respects is that it makes it very difficult and very labour-intensive, if at all possible, to make comparisons of the information across countries, across cities, across regions. What's the value of the data in the bigger picture? It means also that organisations like the EITI and like NRGI spend a lot of time scraping the information that are buried in PDF reports or in Word files and putting it together and converting it in a way that can then be more easily accessed and compared. Prevents the lack of, I guess, standardisation also prevents country data from being understood against the bigger picture of global trends and comparisons, where you very lumpy data set that isn't cross-comparable. To respond to this issue and to try and make more intelligent use of EITI information, we're working with the Secretariat to develop guidance on standardising the way in which the disclosures buried in EITI reports could actually be reported. That is, we've pulled apart the EITI standard, identified the 55 plus separate qualitative and quantitative data points that are required to be reported in EITI reports, and particularly those sub-requirements in requirement 3 and requirement 4. And I looked at options for how these could be reported in a universally consistent way by implementing countries. So what we're trying to do here is not reinvent the wheel. We're trying to do this and try to provide options based on existing industry norms and standards. So if industry, for instance, already has clearly defined norms for the way in which it refers to production volumes of bulk commodities and gold, those could they be the basis of guidance to implementing countries in the way they report on production volumes going forward? Financial information could use the IMF's work to develop a universal way of classifying the way in which revenues are reported in the extractive industries, a way of encouraging countries to report so that, again, we can start comparing the information and bring it together in a global data set. Something that we're looking at is a good and a best approach. I think we all recognise that different countries do have different levels of capacity and, frankly, interest in the way, in the level of information that they report on. So what we're trying to do is establish a good approach, which would be the minimum requirements of the EITI standard, and the better and best approach in terms of this reporting that would be beyond what's required in the EITI and providing greater levels of data disaggregation, information inclusions. Another part of this work beyond, the way in which we refer to this information is the way in which it's accessed. And again, getting back to the issue of PDFs and Excel files and things like that, what options for standardising the way in which this information is reported in a language that's consistent to enable it again to be far more easily accessed at a global level? And I won't go into the technical details of this because, in part I'm not a technical expert. We are looking at options for making this information more accessible. We're looking at standardising or formats such as XBRL so that over time this could actually be a very useful and very valuable tool in the global discussions around the extractive industries. So this is really a rather technical piece of knowledge work, and the first phase that the bank is leading on is really limited to the development of options, and these options are options that will be considered by the board and shared more broadly for greater discussion with stakeholders. And really it will be for the Secretariat, the board and you as stakeholders to decide how to take this work forward. But beyond the EITI, what we're getting the sense of is that this effort to try and standardise the way in which we refer to a range of industry, the range of industry data actually has more applicability beyond EITI, and there's been quite a lot of interest from stakeholders in potentially turning this into, I guess, an open data standard for the extractive industries. So it's been a very encouraging process, and yesterday we had an internal peer review which was quite positive on what we've produced so far. And beyond that, and as a next step, we'll be consulting with a broader range of stakeholders. We're talking to industry, so the ICMM, the International Council of Mining and Metal, and the International Oil Producers Association to get detailed industry feedback. We're also looking for implementing country views and input into what we're doing as well to ensure that what we have suggested as standard ways of reporting are consistent with what you think would be feasible in country and also something that you think would be valuable. The two other points that I'd make here is that this is certainly not trying to straight back countries into reporting in a certain way. More, in addition to the way in which countries choose to report their own audiences, could use this approach to standardise the way in which this information is potentially recorded. And replace, a narrative in the EITI report. This is not turning the EITI into a very technical, dull approach. It's actually trying to ensure that the information that's already required is produced in a way that is as accessible as possible, as comparable as possible as well. So that's really all I wanted to say at the moment, just to let you know that this is a work in progress, that we are getting to the stage that we'd like to share this information and consult more broadly. I would certainly welcome any input that you may have into what we're doing, and I'd be very happy on behalf of the bank to, discuss this further if any of you have, interest in research, or you'd like to discuss how this could be applicable to your own reporting domestically.
Maybe very brief on that, if you can say, when do you think we can share a draft of this with the community of practice?
So probably in the next week or so, I think would be about right. We received some early feedback, as I said, in that first round of consultation, and we'll probably make some minor changes based on that, and we'll probably also want to do it more to explain the background to this work and its applicability. So I would imagine the next week or two, and certainly before the next board meeting in Bern, we'll have a package for consultation, and as I said, very, very much interested in feedback from implementing countries and other stakeholders.
Thanks. Now, let me hand it over to Gay Alessandra Ordiner. She is the National Coordinator of the Philippines EITI. Now, the Philippines EITI, they're younger countries to do the EITI, but they have, from the outset, seen open data as one of their core parts of their EITI. They launched open contracts data on their EITI website. Also, they were also the first country to submit their written comments as consultation, which is why we invited Gay to talk about their comments and anything else on this topic. So, Gay, the floor is yours.
Okay. So the Philippines has been implementing the open data principles as one of its commitments to the Open Government Partnership. And we even have a law that requires all agencies to follow open data formats. So as far as applying open data principles is concerned in the Philippines, that has been institutionalized through law. We have a basis for that, which makes it easier for us doing the efforts that we are doing in EITI. And far, we have seen how promoting open data principles within the EITI context can ensure timely data and more credible data. And in addition to that, it can also lead to a greater appreciation of the EITI principle of the open data principles. If you apply these principles within the EITI context, you are in effect data with a very well-defined goal, which is not just, of course, to comply with the EITI standard, but also to come up with information that allow for better analysis. So you speak of principles of granularity or levels of disaggregation, when you speak of interoperability of data, you are immediately seeing results. And you see that in how stakeholders are analyzing their information. So, for example, in our report, we have seen the need to disaggregate data to a level that can be appreciated by the local government units. And when we did all our roadshows and brought the results of the report to them, you can immediately see how the level of discussion is in fact more the context is more relevant to them, because you can see that they are very, very much interested in seeing how this data can be applied specifically to their areas and to the revenue streams that are applicable to them. So, a benefit that we are seeing in applying the open data principles in our EITI process It makes EITI reporting the EITI process more effective because it ensures timeliness and availability and accessibility of data. So an example would be when we're reporting at the local government level. For example, right now we are looking at about 100 local government units, and which has been very difficult based on our experience in our first report, because it's so hard to get information from them because of time and distance constraints. But because we have started implementing open data even before EITI, the agency that is in charge of generating data at the local government level has done a lot of work already in terms of converting their data in open format. And so for the next report, we will already be using the systems that we have put in place. So already integrated the information that we are asking from our template in the system that they are producing right now, which makes it easier for us to get information from the local government units. Of course, this will also expedite the reporting process and then the risk of errors that we see in paper-based reporting. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it enables stakeholders, especially at the local level, to access data more meaningfully and to contribute to the wider debate on natural resource governance issues. It's also important to note that applying open data principles is a sure way of highlighting the need to revisit principles on confidentiality in use laws and in contractual relations. So, putting in the EITI context, it makes the issue of confidentiality clause even more urgent, because then you are providing a platform or process where the demand for more openness is put forth in a more formal manner, which is the EITI process. And I think an example that I can cite is the instance of one of our agencies at first to disclose contracts of indigenous peoples, but we decided to disclose contracts and open this to the public through the EITI process. This came front and center in the debate of how much we should disclose and what risks or durations for disclosure. So in connection with this, we saw the need to capacitate stakeholders in analyzing data, and it, build capacity is very important, because the fear of companies, most especially, is that there's the risk of data being misused or taken out of context. But since they have already engaged in the process, they can now see that the burden of capacitating stakeholders in terms of analyzing data is not on the government or on the CSO, but on the industry as well. So, I think based on our experience, we have seen how we can benefit from open data principles, even more so when its application is made within the EITI context.
That Gay, may I ask you a question? What do you think EITI Secretariat and Board needs to consider when putting together an open data policy?
Well, I think, of course, different countries would have different baselines when it comes to so if there will be an open data policy and countries are expected or required to comply or to implement policies, then the reality is that the current status of our data would differ from country to country. So a consideration that should be looked into. Another consideration, of course, is what are the practical and legal constraints for to implement that open data policy. And as I said earlier, sometimes in the case of the Philippines, we were able to discover that there are actually laws that deter us from a fullness when it comes to contract disclosure and disclosure of certain information that's required under the standard.
Thank you. So I've so far noted down one question. If you want to pose a question or want to make a statement, you can send a message on the chat window. I urge you to be brief in putting your question and to remember to unmute your microphone when speaking. So the first question that I saw was from Betsy Taylor, who is with SSO and US EITI. Betsy.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you so much. This is a very helpful presentation. I'm with the CSO in the US, and it's really helpful for us to be thinking about this. The issue I wanted to raise is this problem of communities that don't have good access to the internet. And I just wanted to note that very exciting to be focusing on standardization and ways to easily communicate the core data points. And that certainly is something that's being encouraged by the more digital approach to open data. But are you thinking about ways to also have heartbeat or other kinds of output communities where maybe the people that need this data the most don't have good access to the internet? So, for instance, there could be ways that the online open government kind of reporting of data could actually lead to really simple ways to quickly print, say, infographics or a couple sheets of paper that could be handed out in local context. So my question is, how are you thinking through this problem of the digital divide so that in the US we're finding that there is a bit of a tendency as we try to build the digital website to sort of make it fancy and interesting for people who are very sophisticated and with good internet access, but how can we also keep in the need for reach to people that don't have good internet access?
Did you want to come to that question?
I think that's a great question. There's several different parts of the answer. I think we have on the call here a number of national coordinators and representatives from national secretariats who are acutely aware of that challenge. At the last global conference in Sydney, it was amazing to see the diversity of products secretariats and multi-stakeholder groups have developed to meet. And it's not just so if you take as a starting point the big EITI report, it might be many hundred pages. Lots of EITI, national secretariats and MSGs now agree summary reports, using non-technical language, make that available, and then want to dig into more detail can come to into the main report. There's also work done to analyze and to sort through that information, and that of course also requires a lot of skill and time. National secretariats have been doing work on radio, youth theatre, using all kinds of different communication tools. Most EI implementing countries have a communication strategy to get from, and let's be frank, these EITI reports are not the writing documents you've ever read. They're written by auditors and accountants. It's a special skill set to that information to make sure it speaks to the concerns that people have. One of the best examples, and it touches on something that Gay mentioned, is taking this information down to the subnational level and so into the community. Can you highlight IDEX or the government agencies that are in that region and people specific information about the projects that are affecting them? And in the past, but also what is the outlook for the future? The other thing I wanted to mention is we're seeing there's a link to the US EITI is doing, and there are good examples in Indonesia, Peru, Philippines, and people are using now apps to communicate this information. Particular information at the product level, you start mapping the EITI information, comparing it to other and other things that people care about. So you can look at infrastructure, you can look at sensitive environmental areas. So seeing a sort of extra proliferation of different products that are coming out of the EITI process. If I could swing back to the question of open data again. If you look at the US EITI portal, it's impressive. But that's a solution that the US EITI has developed because it's appropriate for that circumstance. We don't think that it's right that we should see 48 or 47 other countries doing the exact same thing. Each will develop its own tools for communicating this information. And there's an open government portal, so that information can be presented through existing. You don't need to build an EITI system. You can use other systems that are already there. So again, we're at a cusp of a sort of a revolution here, where we're getting away from these PDF reports and having a lot more diversity to the demand from our stakeholders. What information do people want? What format do they want it in? And how can we get that information to them as quickly as possible? Maybe someone else on the call, or Andrew wants to comment on that, but that's certainly how we're approaching it from the Secretariat side.
That's from the World Bank side, that as part of the work we're doing, we're really placing a priority on looking at, particularly on the access side, data languages and content system ideas that are that actually work both for countries and that actually have cabinets in that systems, as well as countries where that's going to be a problem. So that the focus will be really on open and relatively cheap ways of managing the information, and not resource-intensive or data-intensive languages. And beyond that as well, I mean, I think one of the things that occurs to me is, problems with the EITI reports is that, they're in PDFs, they're often actually very large files. It's very hard to tease out the information that's specific to a certain area or region. I think that's one of the benefits of being able to break down the information into a more accessible type of data set, where you can actually just pass out the information that's relevant to a certain conference or linked to a certain project. And the other thing that we're seeing, or at least I've been travelling, is how many people in many countries now have access to mobile phones or mobile data platforms. And again, if we're smart with the way in which we manage this process, and we think about the range of ways that people can access information, thinking about mobile phone and smartphone capabilities is certainly something that we should be thinking about as we go forward with, content management systems and internet-based platforms as well.
And for that, there are some participants of this call who are not participating through the WebEx online system, but are dialed in. So if one of you wants to comment on this point or another question, please just unmute your phone and speak now. And introduce.
Bonjour.
Good to hear you.
Okay, it's Michel. I'm from Zabine. It's interesting what is going here. It seems that somewhere on implement countries, the level of information is so high. The entry is so high. The truth of the people are so good. And the EITI is so far that the main Atlantic countries are already doing it, as it explained. And I'm wondering how World Bank is not aware of the real capacity of those countries in open data. The thing is to know who's belonging to those data. What he asks for, is it for citizens, the countries, or people outside the countries who would like to make the data of the countries? This is a fundamental question. We are doing this open data. Is it a thematic country, or do we want to more information to some experts around the world who would like to have more information on our countries? So if we can respond to those questions, we can go ahead on doing open data to see what is needed to our countries. I have heard 2 weeks ago speaking about smartphones, speaking about tablets, speaking about about tablets and smartphones. How the internet is used in our countries, how cheap it is. I mean, it's easy to open data. We need step by step to go ahead in this bill and not get the countries have to take the countries if they are ready to go.
Thank you, Val. If I understand you correctly, there are sort of 2 arguments you're making here. One is that many implementing countries are not ready to think about open data and providing data in electronic forms. It's difficult enough to make it available at all. And the second question that you have is related to ownership of the data. Does it belong to the national stakeholders, or does it belong to anyone to see from everywhere in the world? I want to come in to that question. Maybe I also challenge Gay from the Philippines to come in on that last point, because that's something that she said in her intervention. It's an argument we often hear against open data, that open data can lead to use of data. Interested in hearing how you in the Philippines met or try to meet that argument.
Yeah. One argument that has been extensively discussed, especially in relation to what I mentioned earlier when we were discussing the disclosure of the costs of indigenous peoples, and the concern from government agency that's responsible for the custody of these contracts is it can actually start a lot of conflicts across tribes, because when they compare what they are getting from other tribes are getting, then there's a possibility that it can, create a lot of agreements among these tribes. But we were explaining it to them. We actually said that, well, that may be true, but on the other hand, the point really is for them to be able to know they're getting their fair share. So it's, well, in that context, that's when you can say that disclosure is really a double-edged sword in a way, because it can work to your advantage and it can work to your disadvantage. And this is why capacity building is very important. So it's not that we are not recognizing that reality. I think it's a very valid concern. The concern that we also considered when we were trying to negotiate with the mission that's in charge of this. But then they allowed to disclose the information, realizing that the benefits actually outweigh the disadvantages or the cost. So I think it's really just a matter of building the capacity of the people who will be using the information. I also want to make a comment on the concern regarding the accessibility to internet connection. In the Philippines, there are actually a lot of areas that don't have access to internet yet, and some of the local government units that we visited have actually raised that concern. There were templates last year that were submitted still written. So, but you know, it's a concern, and we want to move away from that paper-based reporting. But again, I go back to what I mentioned earlier that that deter us from fully, appreciating the benefits of open data principles, because it's not just about the format, the open format. It's also about regularity of data. It's also about interoperability, making sure that the data that's being produced by the Mines and Geosciences Bureau is comparable to the data that's being produced by their agencies. And that's very relevant as well. So I wouldn't really be bogged down so much by the fact that we have limitations when it comes to technology. It's a valid concern, but again, that's just one aspect of the whole the whole principle of applying open data.
For that, Gay and Michelle, are there any other comments or questions?
Let me make a brief point. Maybe just, I think Michelle makes a good point, and I think we need to be careful when we're talking about open data about how we refer to this and how we package this. This is not about doing things or taking EITI to a level that the countries are uncomfortable. DRC, Congo, Brazzaville, Philippines, Nigeria, we all report this information anyway at the moment. What we're talking about is, well, if these information disclosures are required, ways of standardizing or trying to make this uniform so that there would be more value in the reports and they'd be more comparable. So in many respects, at least what the World Bank is doing is not talking about we should be on open data or what should be considered open data, but if stakeholders in the EITI wants to go down that path, then would we do it? What would be the ways that this would make sense, and how could we do it in a way that would ensure that this information is as accessible to a broader range of stakeholders as possible, both in terms of no licensing requirements, in terms of the least requirements in terms of computing power, bandwidth, and things like this. But I do think, Michelle, in response to your point, that we do need to, at a level through the EITI, be very careful about how to describe this to make it clear that this is for the purposes of countries and particularly for civil society to back that whole issue of transparency and improved transparency and improved access to information, lead to better understanding and better accountability.
Thank you. Questions. One from Sherwin and then one from Mohammed. Sherwin, want to pose your question first? Mute your phone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We have some issues in regards to format. We heard that the question basically is centered on what could be globally compatible. What are we moving towards a uniformity? So I can basically compare my data to Peruvian data or in Nigeria, etc. Or is it merely a suggestion that's saying, okay, once you have it in this file format, etc., it's okay for comparison? I need some sort of clarity on it.
Sure. I guess what we're doing, and again, I think probably the message is that we need to start sharing this as soon as possible. We'll work to getting the report out very quickly, is to essentially say these are some options for the global EITI community that would enable this information to be comparable across countries, across times, across commodities, and so on. So to take a really basic example, if we're talking about production volumes, the report that we have suggests that, going forward, all countries may want to consider reporting volumes in ounces rather than tonnes, a value of that production being based on US dollar amounts, using these benchmark prices that are listed by the World Bank or the IMF at this time. So really what we're suggesting is a series of both, description, making the information equivalent in terms of the way we're referring to it, but also in terms of the data format or the language. So again, this is just some options for users, implementing countries to consider, and for the board to consider on the basis of what the policy discussion, going forward.
So before giving the floor over to Mohammed, let me just quickly on your question, because you asked a very specific question on whether the CSV file format is recognized good practice, as it were. There's actually a guidance note that was published just a few weeks ago. That's called the Guidance Note on Publishing Data. I'm happy to copy in a link here in the chat window to that one. So C is one of the file formats that is meant there as good practice. We're happy to get in touch with you about that bilaterally later also. So I put down one question now from Mohammed, and then from Mina Horace from Sierra Leone. Mohammed?
From Mohammed first.
Hello, we can hear you very well. Go ahead, please.
More of a comment. I'm Nigerian EITI. To the open data principles, there is a concern principles of confidentiality. When you track inquiries, for instance, into beneficial ownership disclosure, and you are making disclosure of beneficial ownership, sometimes you find out that as the names of individuals, rather you'll be able to trace it to the names of company, a company. You have some extra effort to inquire from the corporate registry to identify who are the nations behind the company. And that brought us to the issue of politically exposed persons, where we find it very difficult to release the names of those politically exposed persons that are behind companies. EITI principle now safeguards the interest of exposed persons. Thank you.
Should I come in there? It's Sam here.
Yeah, and there's also one other question. Maybe we can just take that question also, and then you can come in.
That's fine.
Yeah. So the final question now was from Anna. And Anna.
Hello. Hi, it's Diana Al-Qaisi. I'm from the Publisher to Pay International Secretariat. I'm the regional coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa. And I would like to reiterate one, the name with me, our colleague had earlier commented upon, and it was regarding, how feasible and valuable is the open data going to be for the communities themselves. So I'd just like, to ask that question, and then again build upon what Andrew earlier said in his comments. First of all, we need the open data to be valuable and useful, and that's the whole point behind having these open data. So the question that poses itself here is, need to be useful. A list of priorities regarding what do we do, or how are we going to use the EITI report to promote accountability, going from transparency to accountability. Where does open data rank? We know that we can make it happen. It will be to a certain extent, but how is it going to be? The list of priorities of what to do with the report, is this a priority at the current time? Are we at a stage where all communities are actually using the current data and trying to make use of them and moving into accountability? Or is it that we really need this open data to make that move? I think this is how we should be looking at this issue before going into, the details, the nitty-gritty of having the platform and then thinking of how it's going to be and how to present them. Let's see, first of all, to prioritize usefulness. We don't want to end up with further Excel sheets that for the experts are going to be useful, but for the people who are really meant to use them, they are going to further complicate their lives or not be accessible at all for them. So, building on my engagement with the region that I work for, we are still struggling with actually having the information of the report actually being disseminated to the community, let alone reading the report or understanding them. So my question most probably here is the World Bank itself, to Andrew. Where do you stand vis-a-vis prioritizing these issues? Thank you.
Coming very briefly on that, and then we'll have a chance to wrap up.
Okay. So maybe just to be really clear here, when I talk about or when I think about open data, I'm not talking about transparency. I'm not talking about an official ownership. It's open data to me is the principle of ensuring that the information, at least for EITI, that we're already disclosing, is in a way that makes it as accessible as possible, as comparable as possible. So again, to get back to the point that I tried to make earlier, we're already disclosing a significant amount of information based on the 5 or more qualitative and quantitative data points in the standard. When we should do more when we have open data, just that we should do the disclosures that we're already doing in a better way. So how can we make sure that the information that we have already agreed and committed to provide is the way that is as accessible as possible, comparable as possible, and consistent globally as possible. So I don't think that we need to do more than what we're already doing. I just think that we have an opportunity, if interest among all of the stakeholders, in a way that is actually better and more useful. That's a really important point. And again, I think it comes back to Michelle's point earlier, that we need to make sure that this discussion is framed in a way that goes back to the ultimate users of this information, which are civil society organisations in implementing countries.
Before giving the word over to Sam, I've just to give a final question to Mina from Sierra Leone. Now, there are some other questions that have come in later after that. In light of people's time, we continue the conversation the COP and also bilaterally. Mina, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Okay, some recent discussions among some stakeholders have been to push for more flexible EITI standards to loan in different countries. So if we are pushing for open data, we're talking about standardization. I see us moving towards more rigid requirements because, we have to have this baseline. We all have to, the same rules to guide, how we present our data. So that's one point. But I also think that countries will need time. Those that do not have policies on open data and so on, those policies or laws that that make them to be able to bring up this data. What you say you are not. You said that you just mentioned that when you say open data, you are not talking about contract transparency and all. Because I was going to say that some countries do not have policy that give the right to only so on. So countries will need time to adjust, their policies, review existing ones to be able to come on board fully with their own data. And points will be that I think MSDs should be given invitations to participate in these webinars, because now the national secretariats are doing so, but these are our boards and it's up for the secretariats, which is welcome, but also we all need to move at the same pace and they need to get this information firsthand about where the EITI is going. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mina. Sam, would you up for us very briefly?
And thanks everyone. We've got 2 minutes left, and I'll try to I'll cover a couple of things. A point that was made about Mina also about this idea about adding new requirements. I think that might be something that is sort of put forward through the consultation process. But I think short term, what's needed here is more guidance on different options that are available for countries here. And the other point that came through was about prioritization. And priorities for open data in Trinidad and Tobago are very different from the priorities in the US and Sierra Leone. And also this point that Michelle made about the scope of the data. And that there are significant barriers to disclose information. And in some countries, you also have companies and government agencies that are moving towards routinely making information publicly available. So, in quarterly reports and things like that. So, the institutions that are part of the EITI process are becoming champions of open data themselves. And that's what is the role for the EITI in bringing information together into annual reports, or should they be linking to other sites that provide up-to-date information? One thing happening is we're not trying to centralize all of this information into one place. If information about Trinidad and Tobago, then fundamentally you go to those institutions and you go to EITI and those that have responsibility for EITI in that country. We collect some summary information and we're updating our website with greater focus on open data. That's on the agenda heading into Lima. Meantime, I think there's an enormous amount of work that we can do just changing best practices and avoiding web activity. With IT projects that they can get very, very expensive to maintain. So it's great that we can build up this people that are interested in open data. When there's a proposal for an open data portal in a country, reach out to our colleagues and get some feedback on what are the solutions to help us reduce the costs and also increase the benefits and the impact of this work. I hope I've put a link in the chat window there to our page. The consultation is open for another 10 days. If you have strong views about this, if you have good examples that the EITI board should be aware of, please bring them to our attention. And there'll be some more events on these issues and some more opportunities to comment. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope that you'll continue to support our work and to contribute your ideas on how we can make it more meaningful. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Merci.